There's still snow on the ground and ice crust. It's still below freezing, although today it's just around 30. Very slowly we're moving towards spring, and I started renovating our $150 4 cattle panel high tunnel this morning, and I thought before I took it much further I'm going to pause and show folks what it looks like after a pretty raw winter. -10 was our low, -12 somewhere in there, -30 wind chill a couple times. Very intense, snowy, cold, nearly sunless winter. Let's see how it looks. Spoiler alert, it's pretty raw. So I hope as a viewer you can either forgive or just take in the context that what we didn't do is go through and really clean things up before making this video. I'm going to clean up during the video, do some time lapse of that, but I thought it'd be helpful for folks to see what it does look like after a gnarly winter. Let's see, some highlights I want to call out. For example, red Russian kale, it actually overwintered just fine. They're poised to begin growing. The challenge in here, overarchingly, is that with the winter as tough as it is, and with this space being as comfortable as it was for the small mammals, it got raided by voles, I believe, and mice. And in fact, all of the stems got chewed back quite a bit. The beauty of that, though, is that this was an oversown bed in the first place. We sowed this in the fall, I want to say maybe September, October. And what I'm going to do is go through this bed as part of the process this morning, and the bits that are completely fried we'll send to the chickens. But believe it or not, something like that with that little growth point is still viable, and we'll move a lot of these into the greenhouse. Let me give some context. So we'll move them out of this space and move them into our passive solar greenhouse attached to the home, which is really holding some nice temperatures, and we can monitor that. That'll be a space that we defend from voles. Our friend Stanley the cat will go in there and help with that quite a bit. So first order of business is to assess who survived, and it wasn't that the winter was so raw, it was that the little beings and creatures came in here to survive the winter, and so we'll scavenge out from here who we can. Red Russian kale, absolute winner, and then some sort of Asian mustard that's in here also did just fine overwintering. These transplanted out with a little bit of space between them in the passive solar greenhouse are going to do beautifully. So really the main focus of the work today is to go through, I'm going to pull all these locust staves. We put these in here in the fall, excuse me, coming into the first real cold snap. We pushed all these in and put down comforters, old wool blankets over the crops that were in here. And so I'm going to pull them out and put them back in this crate and store them. I think that, well, we needed something to protect them during the first real intense cold snaps while they were coming into the winter, but that really created the habitat for the little creatures. So we need to reassess. Maybe we end up setting traps, although I'd like to see if we can avoid that. But the hope is to get the staves out, transplant out the viable bits, go through and pull out the woodiest, chunkiest, weediest parts of these beds, renovate them, and then get them set back to these cold frames, which I've talked about in other videos. If none of that makes sense, just bear with me. I'm going to start on it and share some notes. Pulling the stakes pretty straightforward, easy enough. Nice side bonus of pulling them is a couple things that I've observed with that. The center of this high tunnel, where I'm looking at right now, by and large the stakes came out absolutely no problem. I suspect the soil is actually thawed all the way down through here. As I get closer to the east side, where the door is, where there's some little air gaps. In fact, when I broke the snow apart to get through here, I noticed there was some snow that had blown in, which means cold air had come in. The ground is so cold that these three staves here, I can't get out unless I dug them out. It's frozen solid. Likewise on this side. Really good information. I can either fix the high tunnel, redo the whole thing, or just remember that when we set up these cold frames, the absolute most cold, hardy seedlings that we're going to be starting, spinaches, lettuces, those sorts, can happen closer to the door, And as we get further along towards peppers, tomatoes, to remember that towards the center, the interior of the space, it's more buffered from the cold. So those little stakes give some good information. The other thing I'm seeing in here are actual seedlings. Now, these probably came up in the fall. I can't quite tell, are these carrots or dill? One or the other. I'm suspecting dill because that's where this dill was in this area. But it's pretty stunning that they survive the winter as seedlings. And I even see some claytonia, which I know is a very cold hardy plant. Whatever seeds dropped in here overwintered and are growing. So I'm going to try to keep an eye on these and see if we can't work around this. Maybe we set up the cold frames just to the north of them on this side so that they can continue to grow and then transplant them out to the garden. Maybe we're looking at some special genetics of seedlings that are able to handle, I mean, it was -10 with -30 just on the other side of that plastic to a month ago, so it's pretty stunning that they're here. So I'll focus now on, well, let me actually focus. I'll focus now on going through lifting the viable plants, organizing them, getting ready to have them transplant, and then we'll move on to the next steps. More or less everybody up and out. Those that were completely busted went onto the compost. And now we've got some mustards and kales. Not a whole lot to look at, but after this winter, I'm really happy to have these transplants. We'll put them into a nice spot. I might also pot up 1 or 2 each of these and then transplant them out into the garden once we get into the spring, let them bolt and make a tremendous amount of seed, and save that seed as a selection that seems promising for our site. It's getting sunny, so I'm going to move those into the shade relatively soon. I've got to say that one of the real benefits of this high tunnel, being able to have my hands in the soil in mid-February, is a real pleasure. Where we live, without this high tunnel, my hands are not going in that soil. A lot of it's even rock solid frozen, so even just for the ability to get your hands in the soil this time of year, to remember what it's like to be gardening, this has some value. But that's the yield from the southern side of this space. We'll transplant those into the passive solar greenhouse, then I'll clean up the rest and lay out the cold frames and come back. Pretty wonderful side note here, this simple design for a well that gives us thawed water, flowing water, available water, in the frozen times of the year. In the summer this tends to dry out unless there's a heavy rain, but just digging down a few feet with a post hole digger, setting in this barrel with holes drilled in the bottom and putting a screen at the bottom, and then I put a sheet of glass over the top, both to keep let the sun in and keep the heat or warmth of the ground in, and also most importantly to keep little critters from falling in there, partially to avoid them suffering because that's horrible, and then also we don't really want dead little mice in that water. But it's thawed, and so once we're ready to start getting seeds going in here, as we get warmer and warmer, we should have a reliable source of water that's very, very easy to get at. So that should wrap it up for the pre-flighting of this high tunnel getting ready for seeding. I guess I should clarify that part of the goal with today, well, obviously to get out whatever is viable and valuable, move them along, which is pretty slim after this winter, but worthwhile anyway. But by getting these cold frames down on the soil and having them capped, now it would benefit them, of course, to clean them. We'll come out with a rag and some vinegar at some point, but they're working anyway. But on a day like this, it's cold outside, but I can feel the heat pumping in this high tunnel. Under those cold frames, it's going to get very, very warm, real high humidity, and the goal is to have whatever weed seeds or potential future crop seeds, to have them germinate in the next week or two. And in this way, by the end of February, when we're really ready to start with our spinaches, lettuces, onions, some of the earlier crops that we want to get going to move out into the garden, we'll be able to do a first round of weeding in those cold frames. And so that's part of the whole idea here. But very simple, straightforward. These are all storm windows or windows that people were throwing out, or for $1 or $2 a piece. So the whole thing, very low tech, low carpentry skills. This high tunnel, as you probably know if you watch this channel a fair bit, $150. This will be its, I think, 4th year, maybe. It's performed incredibly well. So if you are thinking about building a high tunnel or season extension for yourself and you have limited budget, limited skill, like me, then you absolutely can do it. And now's a great time if you're in the cold northeast. So again, that's the inside of there. We'll do some updates as we get ready to do some seeding. And there's our reality outside this space. So quite the difference. Looking forward to being able to have my hands in the dirt, in the soil, quite a bit. Thanks for watching.